Welcome to What's on Your Bookshelf, a life and leadership podcast where we live out loud the pages of the books that are on our shelves, with your host, Denise Russo and Sam Powell.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf. This is our life and leadership podcast where we're living out loud the pages of the books that are on our bookshelves. We are working through a book called Joy at Work by Marie Kondo. My name's Denise Russo. My co-host is Sam Powell. And Sam, I cannot really believe that we're almost done with the book. We were just talking about that before we started the episode.
I know. I can't believe it's the middle of the year. I can't believe we're halfway through the theme of the year. This year has really flown by. But I guess that makes sense. You and I have both had very busy, very kind of different, crazy years so far. So it's no wonder that everything feels a bit messy and a bit fast.
Yes, and I will say this as well, as this book, just like all the others, comes at perfect timings for the things we're going through. Like, you ended up personally having to create a mess in your business to get clarity for what you wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I had to create a mess personally and professionally for what I wanted to do for work, including leaving my natural comfort zone and moving all the way across the other side of the country while dealing with personal things at the same time. And everything that we learned in this book is to clear space and to bring in more joy, and it takes intentionality. And so I think for me, we're going to do this. This episode is going to be the rest of the book, friends. So this is the chapter 10 and 11. And so for me, when I think about how we end this book from where we started, it's essentially telling us that tidying up, which could be the physical nature of cleaning up and decluttering something, but it's also about decluttering your thinking and your approach to things. It's an act of intentional leadership because just like the life-changing magic of tidying up, which is why I wanted to read this book together with you, Sam, it's about removing what no longer serves us and helping others be able to do the same and creating space for meaning and joy and better relationships and finding that center of our ikigai and purpose in life.
Yeah, for sure. And she says here in these last final chapters here, and one of the chapters, and the reason we're combining them is really short, but it's about sharing the magic of tidying, which is chapter 10, and then chapter 11 is how to spark even more joy at work. So this is about sharing and sparking more joy. But she says here that, really this whole process is learning about yourself, and that brings you closer to the life that you want. And through the process of tidying and through specifically using her process, right, of really taking inventory and, holding something for a moment, whether that's physically or mentally or emotionally or all three, right, of does this bring me joy? Does this serve the life that I really am looking for? In doing that exercise over and over again in all these different aspects of your work and of your life, you learn so much about you and what you're doing. And you and I were just talking about this before we hopped on, because I was saying I'm updating my website, and it feels like one of those things that just feels a tad bit tedious, even though I enjoy building websites and, web pages and all that sort of stuff. It is something that does spark joy for me. But this particular exercise sort of doesn't, because at the beginning of the year, I did an entire revamp of my website around my business that I had tidied. I'd spent really purposeful time at the end of last year, beginning of this year, really getting honed in on, okay, what really am I offering? What help am I giving? What does that look like? How do people, get that from me? All the things you do in a business to just tidy it up and say, okay, very clean delivery processes, all that sort of stuff. And it was really good. And I updated my website, and it finally was less of chaotic. Here's a whole bunch of things about what I do, and more of let me lead you in a direction. Let me help you, by guiding in a certain way. And so it was one of those things where when it was done, I was like, wow, this actually feels legitimate and purposeful and great. But it was also one of the things that as I was doing it, I realized the trajectory that it was putting me on wasn't where I wanted to go. And so through that work of tidying my business, of tidying the work that I do, of cleaning up all of the million things I was offering out to people and getting it organized and doing the work of organizing it, I had all this clarity on, like I said, what she says, like the life that I want, the career that I want, the job that I want, the business that I really set out to. And then that sparked this whole sort of journey I've been on. And now having to re-update the website to be more of a little choose your own adventure type of a thing. But it's, I really do think that as we've read through this whole book, this is really a self-discovery journey through your messes, which is just not what I was expecting as we started this book, but like just feels like an extra little gift through going through the process. And like, I really would encourage like anybody to just go tidy one thing, like take one category, one area, go back and find one of the chapters that feels messy for you. Go listen to one of our episodes on it and like go tidy it and just see what you discover about yourself. Because I think you and I've both learned a lot as we've been going through this journey.
I love that you discovered that in this book because that is what I got out of her first book. Because it's called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. And the essence of the book, it makes you think it's just about cleaning your house. And I think I shared this with you and probably our listeners a million times by now, that my mom gave me the book. And at first, when she gave it to me, I thought it was because she just thought my house was messy.
Passive aggressive gift.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's partially true. But what I learned in reading the book was that it was so much more. It was about bringing joy into your life. And I think that in these last chapters here, which talk about how we share this with others, you bring up a really important and interesting point, was that if you focused on yourself first, you focused on what you needed to deconstruct and reconstruct and build anew and all these things that you were doing. And I imagine that this also, what you've gone through is going to help you to help your clients, even if it's not specifically about things like tidying up, because you were talking about tidying up your business model. And when you think about the type of clients that we're working with, which are people either who are in career transition, or they're people who are unhappy at work, or they're people that are young that are growing into becoming leaders in their own right, is that you're demonstrating the benefits by having gone through this stuff yourself. It's probably no different, Sam, than if you were to talk with a personal trainer. I suspect that something clicked for somebody who's a personal trainer about how optimizing their physical body made them feel joy and feel good, and they wanted to then share it with others. And this is the same type of thing, right? Like we learn something from these books, which is why we have this podcast, because we want to live them out loud for ourselves first, and then we share the lessons with others with the hope that it's something that can help them as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really what this is. And she talks about this in the sharing aspect of just being the example, right? Like you might not always have the power to be like, okay, guys, we are implementing tidy meetings. We are implementing tidy workspaces, right? Like you might not be the person, you might just be somebody on the team, but your example, right? What you show, how you live your life is a testament to other people, right? Is that guiding light for somebody on, on how to do this. And she talks too about, doing things like, really showing care for the workplace outside of your own space, right? So I tidy my own desk. I become this like, beacon of what tidiness really brings to, our work and the joy of our life. But then I extend that out and I show care for the workplace, right? I pick up a stray piece of paper I see, right? It's that almost like the scout model, right? Of leaving something better than when you found it type of a thing, of like that, people observing that. And there's been a lot of research on that too, of like when we see someone doing something good and helpful and useful in the world, we are more apt to turn around and do the same thing, right? Like you hear those viral stories of like, I bought, the coffee of the people behind me in line at Starbucks, and then they did the next thing, right? Like there is this just sort of piece of us as humans that when we see, we do. And, she talks too in this section about, and I guess this is more Scott writing this part, but really about treasuring your coworkers, and the art of appreciation. And we talked a lot about that in our happiness time, and they talked about how this is something that makes you happy by really showing appreciation. And it's like, yeah, we've seen that research, we read that book. But right, when we think about sharing the tidying, those are kind of the three big things that, that they talk about. And I like those, right? They're easy, they're approachable, grabbable. You could do them for sure once you've gone through this process of your own tidying and self-discovery.
I think that for me, there's two ends of a spectrum here. If you are somebody who works in a physical place, part of it's physical, part of it doesn't have to be in a physical place. But the first part is this idea that if you do showcase as a leader your space to be something that's organized, I think we read this in one of the chapters, that subconsciously people think you're smarter, or that they have a different impression of you if your space is clear and tidy. And a poorly organized desk could impact also the people around you, especially if you are working in cubicle areas, I suppose. But it's even more than that on the higher side of the spectrum, which is about workflows and things like that. So we talked about this a couple of episodes ago about things like your meetings and the people that you invite into conversations and stuff like that. So for me, I would say that if you're a leader listening to this episode and haven't checked out this book, or you think it's only about cleaning your inbox and your email, it's so much more than that. It's about how when you can give clarity to people, and clarity comes from cleanliness. And we don't just mean like, scrubbing bubbles. We're talking about just open space that people can focus on more meaningful work. It will reduce unnecessary stress, maybe even burnout. It helps people make better decisions. And so when you're thinking about decluttering your own space or your own process or your own workflows or your own business or your own website, maybe think about, well, what activities in your business day, whether you are an entrepreneur or you work for a company, what activities truly add value? That goes back to the chapters of, are you attending a meeting or leading a meeting because you have to, or because you want to, or because it's a check in the box thing?
Right.
What things can be eliminated, right? At the end of the day, if you can remove the things that don't matter, it's like remove the rest so you can focus on the best.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like just that little tiny exercise, right, of taking stock of those two things, right? What's good here? What do I enjoy? What do I want to see more of? And what's not great here? What do I want to see less of? Like that'll get you a lot of percent of the way there, right? Of figuring that out. And they talk, and they kind of close this book out at, in the end of one of these chapters here of talking about work-life balance. And that's always the advice that I give to people when they're asking, like, well, what does good work-life balance look like? What does that mean? And it's like, well, work-life balance is different for everybody. And you always say, like, there is no such thing as work-life balance. You've got a life and work's part of it. But when you talk about that concept of with people, it's like, what is that, right? Life that you really want. What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? And how do you take the steps to gain some control over that, right? Because I think when people are often talking about work-life balance, they're talking about the fact that like the things that they feel they have to do got really untidy, right? Like it got really messy between all of these to-do lists in my work stuff, all these to-do lists in my, personal life, and there's just not enough time to fit them all together. And that lack of control over our time makes us feel like this is bad. This is like, I'm not on the path that I want. And in this art of like tidying, you can really get to that balance that you want. And balance is constantly like, it's a moving scale. It's not something that is like, I've achieved work-life balance. It's an everyday living and breathing thing. And so it's, I think that exercise that you just talked about is great and really hits to that point of like, the art of tidying here gets you to this joyful work-life balance that we're really all after.
Well, and speaking on exercise, I want to go back to something that we offered at the beginning of the year because it's an exercise, because of something you just said. So you were talking about wanting something more and wanting something less. What do I want more of in life? What do I want less of in life? And that is 100% the principle design of Agile Brain. Agile Brain, though, goes deeper than just cleaning off your desk. It's about your subconscious level of your emotions and the things you think about and your thoughts. And so we had offered at the beginning of the year to gift Agile brain exercises to anybody who is interested. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes as the assessment, and then you get a report back that shows you what are the things that I'm really thinking of that I do want more of in my life or less of in my life, and not just more emails or less emails. It's about the things you want in your life that bring joy and purpose, and that center of the table ikigai principle. And recently, Sam, I was having a meeting with the people at Agile Brain, and they were talking about how the evolution of emotional intelligence, which in business is a big hot topic, and there's lots of books about it, there's classes about it, there's assessments about it. This is not an emotional intelligence assessment or exercise. It's what they call motivational intelligence, because beyond the emotional intelligence, it's almost like reactive, like, oh, well, now I know this about me. But what we don't get from that is, well, what's motivating me to think these things or believe these things or act upon these things or not to think, believe, or act on these things? It's called motivational intelligence. So I do want to go back to the offer in case you're new to our show and say that if you just reach out to us, there are zero strings attached. There's no hidden agenda. There's nothing else that you have to think there's going to be attached to it, unless you ever wanted to have something attached to it, like coaching, which we always recommend regardless. But you can take an Agile Brain exercise for absolutely free, no charge, as a gift from us, from what's on your bookshelf to you, because it is about this relationship between joy and purpose. And that's really the end of this book, is that the strongest themes in this final chapter seem to come from this idea of how do you get alignment and reflect your values and your strengths and your contributions. And so it took us from everything from how do you decide what pens you want on your desk to the end of the book, which is all about the contributions and the people around you and the things that matter and removing distractions and improving connections.
Yeah. And she also does touch here at the end about like what happens if you tidy and you realize you're not in the job or the career that you want, right? And what does that look like? And she has some interesting stories, and definitely encourage people to read the book about people who, they got tidy, they did those kinds of self-assessments that you're talking about, right? Like what here is working for me? What's motivating me to stay, right? What does all that look like? And then deciding that if I just take a little bit of control on some of the levers, I don't need to make a huge job change, right? I don't have to blow it all up and start all over. And so, I think it really is that process of like, by assessing and tidying and going through this self-discovery journey, you then have the space to see very clearly what's on your desk, but also what's in your life, what's in your career, what's in this job. And I've been feeling all of this friction, feeling all of this, stuff that I don't really enjoy. And now I have the space to really figure out, well, what is it that I want and that I like. And I think the motivational intelligence is huge. I do that with my athlete assessments that I do with kids in competitive sports. I do a whole section on what are the things that are motivating for them. What does that really look like in a sports context? Because it is so important. It's a huge part of the puzzle, and having intelligence over what keeps me going when things are tough, or what brings that excitement. That's part of understanding the joy of working, right? The joy of living is really knowing yourself better. And I think this whole process will bring you to that. And you might find that you got to make some changes in your career. You and I have talked to plenty of people in those spaces. I've had plenty of clients who have had that moment of, I don't think this is what I want to do anymore. And then, we assess. I've had clients that leave, that change jobs, that change careers, that stay, depending on sort of what clarity you get to. And that's okay if that's where this whole journey leads you as you're going through kind of tidying your work. If it gets to the point of, now I got to question this space and this career and this job that I'm at. A lot of people do that. Normal journey. Get some help if you need it.
I wonder if the key is that you've mentioned this word probably even subconsciously multiple times. I wish I could have had a tick box to say how many times you said the word space. I think that's the key. Is this book is about creating space, and it doesn't mean to create emptiness or void. It's about creating space for clarity. I was messaging back and forth with a mutual friend of yours and mine yesterday, And this is a person that had worked in one of my organizations that then came and worked in one of your organizations. And I'll have to tell you off mic who I'm talking about later if you don't catch who it is in the story. But he was sharing with me that he found an opportunity to create some space for himself for thinking time because he was unhappy doing what he was doing, but creating that space helped him to refine and tweak it to find the place where he wanted to be. And to your point, it doesn't mean you have to quit your job, quit the company that you work for, or even quit the team that you're on. It's about optimizing the situation of where you are to bring you joy and happiness and purpose and peace. And I was so happy for this person that they feel like this next step is bringing them closer to that place. For me, I had to blow the whole thing up, but not because I created so much space that I got rid of something. And what I mean by that is I worked in the music industry for a really long time before I worked in the corporate world. And it got to the point, Sam, for me where it started feeling like a job and not joy, which is why I ended up leaving that industry to move into an entirely different industry, altogether different industry. And then I did that again out of the next industry and did it one more time again after that. And then got to the point where space was automatically created for me through a layoff. And when that space was created, it was an opportunity for me and for you, I think, as well, for us to sit with who do we want to be, almost like atomic habits. Who do I want to be known as? What do I want to be known for? And so we were able to really truly reinvent ourselves. Like the things that you're doing now with these youth assessments and the leadership development for young athletes is completely something that I imagine might have been a blip on your radar, but not a fully baked plan at the time when we were in the throes and in the midst of a very successful corporate trajectory in our career. And likewise for me, where I am right now, working in an environment back to where I started from, which was sports and entertainment, which was from my past. If I had decluttered that from my life fully, like threw it away fully, there wouldn't have been an opportunity for it to be blended back into today. No different than for you, while you were still working, you were still a coach, not even just like a professional coach. I mean, like a basketball coach and around youth sports constantly with your kids. And so for me, this essence of tidying up, yes, there are some things to eliminate from your life, whether it's people or things, but there's some things that just need to be cleaned up and set aside because maybe you want them later. And Marie talks about this in the first book, which is you look at these things and you basically say, is this something that no longer brings me any joy? Or is it something that I love and at 100% right now in this moment is bringing me joy? Or is this something that has the potential for joy? And she's pretty much on the cutthroat side of get rid of anything that isn't giving you current joy because you could always get more of the other thing. But that's easy to say, like if you don't like a shirt, get rid of it and then go buy another one later. This is saying that there's some things in your life that you can't get rid of, but need a tidy place to be until you need to use them again.
Yeah, and she even addresses that a little bit at the end of saying like, hey, if there is something that you can't get rid of, right? Like for whatever reason, you get to have whatever reason you want with it, then put it in pride of place, right? Like put it somewhere where it's like, yeah, like this is mine, I own it. I realize it doesn't make sense here. Like I realize it feels a bit messy, but I know why I'm keeping it. I know why it's here. And instead of like making it the dirty secret in the back of your closet, you put it out, put it in right there with everything else, right? Like currently my business looks messy because of this like, transition phase and things like that, but I'm just gonna own it and put it in front of place like, hey, are you here for this random thing or this random thing? Right? And like then they'll help you, move forward and that's okay. And it doesn't have to be some like, oh, I'm trying to focus on this and there's this other thing I do back to the side because I can't get rid of it. It's no, I know why I'm doing both. I know how they fit together and they're just gonna sit there out in the world for everything, right? I think she talks about like a bag, like keeping a bag that, for some reason you're keeping, but you're just gonna put it out. It's gonna be part of what you do and what you have and part of your story for the reason that you want it to be part of your story. And I love that, right? Of pulling the original, like the OG thing you did in your career back to where you're at now. Like I love the poetry of that. I think that's beautiful.
I was telling somebody the other day just how serendipitous it is that it's come full circle. And it is an interesting story. And I have a lot of gratitude for it because you don't think about that in the moments of you doing a job or working for a company that it's ever going to have a full circle moment. And mine is literally 30 years in the making of this full circle moment. So maybe we'll have to do an episode one day about that. And since we have a few minutes left, I would love for you to share sort of this new adventure that you're on, because there might be a listener out there that doesn't know that we are beyond just business coaches and people who read books, and we're friends together. So why don't you share a little bit about some of the new things that you're doing, because maybe a listener that's listening doesn't even know that this is in your space.
Yeah, that's a good call. And yes, we are very complex people here at the end of the day. But yeah, so I spent the last 3 years being a career coach, specifically for mid-career leaders. But before all of that, if we go back to my origin story, right? I grew up the daughter of a coach. I grew up playing sports. I have a son who plays competitive sports, and that has really been a theme throughout my whole life. And when I started my company, Lead the Game, I started it around leadership development. That's what I wanted to do, was leadership development. I had no idea how to run a business to do that, really. And I sort of fell into the career coaching part of it and really focusing on self-leadership, right? Like I take control of my career, I lead it, all of that sort of good stuff. But in the back of my mind, right, is always this, specifically youth sports, right? My dad was a high school basketball coach predominantly, but he coached everything at all levels, and he's a teacher as well, right? So there's always been this aspect of youth sports to my life, besides the small break when I was maybe in my 20s before I had kids. Um, and, to me, I think sports is one of the best playgrounds for leadership development. And it's because in a sports environment, especially a competitive sports environment, you have to do so much under pressure, right? There's pressure to perform and be a part of a team and do all of this stuff. And pressure to me really illuminates leadership behavior. And so in sort of this whole journey, what I realized is I'd love to take leadership development concepts, translate them over to sports and down into youth athletes, so that when we say we're developing the whole person through this insane sports adventure that a lot of people are on and maybe don't want to necessarily be on fully, that they're getting something, like you're getting something worthwhile out of it, right? Like, your kid's going to become a better person, a better leader. They're going to be able to launch into this world successfully, because I think we're all concerned about that. And you have kids who are in that launch phase. Like, it's a concerning thing for parents. And so what are the foundational skills that are going to help them get there? And how do you observe that now? And so what I'm focused on now is really performance behavior that indicates leadership behavior down the road, right? And so I've developed a couple of assessments that help you really understand who your athlete is. Fundamentally, I've taken things like DISC and motivation and friction patterns and pulled together so you can get a profile on your kid, which honestly for me is one of those things. Like, it took me till I was like almost 30 in my first leadership development program at work to really get this kind of insight on myself. And now I have this insight on my 11-year-old. And so I can show up really differently for him, because I can look at him through the lens of who is he wired to be? What are the things that motivate him? What are the pressure patterns that he feels? What's that friction look like for him, really specifically? And then we can assess the behaviors that we see all of the time, right? And it's all him filling out the assessment. It's a self-assessment. So it's insight into him in a way that, like, I wouldn't normally ever have if I didn't have him fill out this quiz and all of that. And so then from there, it helps me as a parent and helps other parents really show up differently for your kids, so that I know I'm really helping him in those moments where he feels frustrated and I'm watching him shut down, meltdown, whatever, because of the pressure of the situation. And I know what to say on the car ride home now, right? Like, I know what to do. And so I'm just on this mission to help parents do that and fill the world with better athletes, or with better leaders, one athlete at a time.
Well, first and foremost, I know we're out of time for today, but I am so proud of you and happy for you to have developed all of this. We're in the throes of the FIFA World Cup right now. Uh, and I was thinking yesterday was the opening day because we record these in advance. And the first thing I thought of was my kids. They both started playing soccer when they were 3, 4, 5 years old and continued all the way until they got right to the beginning of college. And looking at these athlete stories that are coming out in the news from different celebrity athletes or players that have some special interest story, these things weren't available to them, whether it be my kids or these athletes that we're seeing on television. And I think that we can both say that, and even with the NBA finals being on television, that you'll see stories of people that you think, wow, that's a stand up quality player, person, human.
Mhm.
And wow, that person definitely could use a lead the game assessment to help them. And so I do want to say that I think that what you've developed is something that's crucial as we bring up that next generation of leaders, because young people only kids that are in these things like student government or maybe like specialized clubs where they're an officer in the club have opportunities to even remotely have exposure to
Right.
things like what you're talking about. And now what you've just done is democratized something that's available to anybody at any level and pretty much at any age to be able to give people insights so that just like you can optimize your body by what you decide to feed it with food, this is optimizing what you can feed your body through these tools and knowledge. So I'm so happy that you did blow up your business to be able to focus on this part. Speaking as a soccer mom.
Yeah, and I mean that's the hope, right? When I mean, you and I talk about this all the time with work is like, what's that purpose, right? What's that drive? What's that thing that you want to really bring to the world and in what you do? And to me, this feels like the next right thing. And as I talk to parents and coaches and, people who run, these competitive programs, there's a gap here that people want desperately in the middle of this really kind of like the insane path that youth sports have taken. And so yeah, let's help people out and figure out what they want. And I don't know, it's interesting that you and I both sort of landed in a little bit of a sports zone here, kind of around the same time. It's I don't know, serendipitous, I guess.
Very much so. And so, on that note, next week, we are introducing the next book of our series. It'll be book 3 for the year, and we'll have one more after that, most likely. And so, I hope that you'll join us next week because we'll give you enough time to get the book, but we want to give you an essence about why we chose the next book, why the next book is in this part of the series, just like we've done in the past for our other years. But for today, my name is Denise Russo, and on behalf of my friend Sam Powell, this has been another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf.